Hi there, my name is Ewan Nicholson. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Remembering Love. If you're new to this channel, this is a channel where we explore subjects of healing, childhood trauma, CPTSD, and all the various things surrounding that. So if you like that kind of content, please click on the like and subscribe button. I put out videos pretty regularly and you'll be updated with when new videos come out. If you're not new to this channel and you're coming here again, thank you very much for coming back. Now, the subject of today's video is it's a pretty sensitive subject. It's the subject of, do we need to forgive our abuser or abusers in order to heal from our childhood trauma? And as you can imagine, this is a very sensitive subject. So what I'd like to explore in this video is the question of, what does that mean? What's involved in forgiving our abusers, and the potential value in that. I'd really mostly like to share my experience of this, because I don't feel like it's a subject that has a yes or no answer to it. It's very, very personal. It's very, very subjective. And what I'd like to share with you is just how I would probably say I haven't done that, but I have done something similar to that or equivalent to that that may be connected to that, which I'll explain. If that sounds a little convoluted, what my version of that has been and what has and hasn't kind of worked for me regarding that. So to begin with, the question itself is kind of loaded, because you could even say that this question is problematic. First of all, do you need to do anything to heal from your childhood trauma? And I would say, like, anyone tells you you need to do this or you won't get that, to me is problematic and unhelpful. Now, are there some things like you need to stop drinking a bottle of vodka every day if you expect to heal your childhood trauma? I would say the answer to that is pretty straightforward. Yeah, you probably do, but whether that person's ready for that, capable of that, at a point where they want to do that, is then another question. So there are some kind of, I guess, not crude, but straightforward things to say, look, if you want to do these things, you kind of do need to do those things. But beyond that stuff, it's very, very personal. So do you need to forgive your abuser to heal your childhood trauma? I would say you don't have to do anything. You have to do what you feel you need to do based on where you're at, what you're going through, and where you are in your journey. So my first answer to that question is no, I don't think you have to do anything. You just have to do what's required from where you're coming from. The second thing to understand is things change. What you feel is necessary at some part of your journey isn't necessary at the other, and then it goes back to feeling necessary again. This journey of healing childhood trauma is not a straight line. There's no recipe where if you pretty much do these things with a cake and follow this recipe precisely, you pretty much can replicate this result. Healing trauma is not like that. There isn't a set of ingredients you have to mix in a certain way. And what may be really helpful for someone in that process of forgiving someone may be very destructive and forced for someone else. So that's also something to be aware of. There is no recipe for this. There's no, you need to do this to get that. Now, that said, the process of forgiveness, the process of really feeling inside your heart that I forgive that person for doing those terrible things to me, for some people does have tremendous value. There's a video I saw on YouTube, I'm going to try to find a link for it and put it in the description, about a woman and her journey of forgiveness, that her daughter was murdered when she was 18 by her husband who was 19, and she developed a relationship with him in prison. She forgave him for murdering her daughter. And it was just a very powerful story, and it was very touching, and this woman just had such a big heart, and you could see that the impact of her forgiveness on his story, his redemption, his grief, his ability to forgive himself on some level. Not that I think he'd got there, but you could see the ripple effect of that open-heartedness and that love that she gave him. I mean, this guy literally murdered her daughter, and she had compassion for him. He came from a very troubled background. He had his own issues, and she was able to find it in her heart to not just forgive him, but she really loved him and cared for him in a way that was just, to me would be saintly. I have daughters. I don't know if I could do that. I don't know if that would be in my heart to do that. So, you hear these stories of forgiveness and they are very powerful. People are able to kind of forgive people in the face of real horror and real evil, you could say, and they find it in their hearts to do that. And good on them, it's commendable. But I'm also aware that if you don't feel like you want to do that, you don't feel like you're ready for that, and you force yourself to do that, or you feel this pressure to kind of like that's necessary, then it is not going to be helpful. Like forgiving, in inverted commas, your abuser is going to be destructive because it's not real forgiveness. It's not coming from a real sense of I really feel this and I really want this. It's coming from an expectation that to get here I need to do these things. So on one hand, if you feel like that's necessary, you feel like you want to, you feel it in your heart that it's an important part of your healing process, then yeah, I think it's a good thing to do, or it's something that works for you. But if you're at a point in your life where you just feel like you can't, you won't, you're not interested, I still think you can heal. I don't feel like it's a prerequisite. And in terms of my own story of forgiveness, I would say my dad being the main inverted commas abuser, I don't feel like I would say, look, I've forgiven him in this sense that, I've had this moment where I've kind of said, I forgive you, either he's dead now, but before he died, or sometime after, even psychologically to myself, I forgive you. That just hasn't happened for me. That hasn't been something I've focused on. It hasn't been something that I felt is necessary. But what has happened, which isn't me consciously forgiving him, is just as I've better understood myself and as I've had more compassion for myself, as I've forgiven myself, and this is something that a lot of abuse victims have to deal with, the ability to kind of to feel like I'm not to blame, that everything that happened wasn't my fault. As I've started to view my own experience through the lens of compassion, more so than judgment, blame and shame, then a natural consequence of that, for me at least, is to view my father with more compassion, is not to see things in such a way where he's like the villain and I'm the victim, and he's like this terrible human and I'm like the victim of his terribleness, and that's just the way it is. And it's not that those things aren't terrible, and it's not that there isn't victimhood in what I've experienced, and he isn't a villain to some degree, he is. But at the same time, like, it isn't so black and white. And my dad had his own trauma and his own history, and again, it's not justifying what he did and the way he was, but there, everything has context and everything is part of some broader picture. And as I've viewed myself with more compassion, and I feel more compassion for myself, it's very hard when you feel that to just lock it in, that that's just for me, that compassion I have, an understanding of my own issues just stops here with me. That a natural outcome of compassion is it tends to go outwards. It tends to extend itself to the people around you, to your community, to the world at large. It's very difficult to lock that compassion in. And I think if you did, I'm not sure if that would be compassion. So for me, I don't feel like I've forgiven my father in that kind of formal sense, but I do view him with more compassion and more understanding, and he's dead now, and wherever he may be, I don't want him to be suffering, and I don't want bad things to, I wouldn't like the idea that he's stuck in some hellfire somewhere. I mean, I don't want that. I don't want him to be in pain. He's a sentient being. He's a person that was a little kid once and was innocent, and different things happened. And for me, viewing him that way, I don't know, maybe it's a form of forgiveness, maybe it's a form of letting go, maybe it's a way of discharging the power of what went on. I don't know if I call it forgiveness, but I definitely feel like it's something that's part of how I've evolved in my own healing journey. And then what I've come to understand as well is there are layers to this. So I reach a certain level of compassion for myself, and I think, I'm getting somewhere, and then something comes up, and some part of the past resurfaces, and I realize, well, I still have this thing to deal with that I didn't think I had to deal with, and then then you deal with that. And this process of healing is very lateral. There's layers to it, and we think we're one place and we find we're somewhere else, and we move forward. And so the process of having compassion for my father isn't like fixed. It contracts and expands, and and forgiveness, I think, is very much a similar thing, that you can forgive someone and think you've arrived at this point of forgiveness, and then something gets stirred up and you realize, oh, I haven't quite got to where I thought I've got to, and I still have resentment and anger and hate. Maybe I thought I dealt with all that and suddenly realized I still got this repressed anger towards my father or my abuser that I thought I'd transcended. Now I can look back and realize my forgiveness was a way of avoiding disowning that anger. And this is a very lateral, very organic process. So for me, the answer to the question is, do we need to forgive our abusers to heal? My answer would be no, you do not need to do that. If you do that and it is beneficial for you, then yeah, of course it's beneficial. If you don't do that and you find ways to heal and resolve that doesn't require that, then that works too. There is no recipe to this. For me, it's probably more about compassion towards myself that's eventually extended towards my father than it is this kind of like act of ritualized forgiveness. And are they part of the same process? I think so. They're just part of this process of healing, of letting go, and of feeling like I'm not my trauma, but my trauma exists. And it's very personal. It's very subjective. So for me, it's been more about compassion than forgiveness. And maybe that one includes the other. I'm not quite sure. But if you're on this journey of healing trauma, I would encourage you to just work with where you're at. Like, you don't have to be anywhere. You don't have to be doing anything, and try not to force anything, because it just doesn't sort of work. So to me, there is some effort required. There's some direction we need, but often we just have to work with where we're at and what we feel like we need, and we're our best guides. Most of us have an intuitive sense of what we can handle, what we're ready for, what we gravitate towards in our healing journey, and just trust that. And you're your own best guide and therapist. So look, I hope this has made sense to you. I hope this has helped. Please take care of yourself, and bye bye.